Of all the giants in this world, mountain giants are the ones that ordinary people most often have the misfortune to encounter. While they are generally quite meek and peaceful, they seem to regard all small folk in the same way that dragons and demon princes do, as any other animal or even as livestock. It takes a lot to provoke a mountain giant, but when its patience finally runs out, it explodes into unbridled aggression. Furthermore, their size, clumsiness, and short-sightedness mean that anyone who gets close risks being accidentally crushed by a misstep or a dropped object. Mountain giants often live alone in the mountains, where they raise goats and sheep. Their temperament can vary considerably. Some are accommodating and communicative, but I have also heard many stories of small folk suffering at their hand, whose barns were raided and whose youngsters were abducted and forced to look after the giant's livestock. The giant we called Greycliff watched over our village for over a century, but suddenly his eyes went dim and his mind dull. We couldn't stay. The village was abandoned and no longer exists. Excerpt from Dragonbane Bestiary from Free League Publishing. Hello, and welcome to this episode of I Am the Party, and I am Paul. It's great to be talking to you again. You may have noticed, or maybe you haven't, that it might sound a little different this time around. I'm trying out a new recording technique utilizing a different microphone and recording directly into my desktop rather than a little digital voice recorder that I've been using up to this point. I hope the sound is great, usable, listenable, all those great things, but open feedback. So if you prefer my old sound, which really kind of went in and out, was very inconsistent as far as how loud I was, I had to go back in, even with what you might have heard in my actual episodes where the sound was inconsistent. That was actually a doctored up version of the inconsistencies that my old recording technique used to have. So anyways, happy to be recording this new microphone. We'll see how it goes. I'm eager to hear it myself. Read about giants in the opening here, and if you listen to the last episode, certainly left on a cliffhanger with what appears to be a mountain giant. It's not my most creative or innovative cold open reading that I've done. It is also applicable, I guess you could say. Well, it's not innovative, it at least is straightforward. I do intend to use a combination today. We left off on the edge of combat, and I'm going to use a combination of Cairn light OSR rule system for my actual combat, but also using the actual entry from the giants that I just read to determine, because Dragonbane is set up wonderfully as far as running monsters go. You roll a d6 every round, and each monster in the bestiary has a table of results of what the monster is actually going to attempt to do, what kind of action. It runs itself extremely well, and I'm really excited to see how to translate the action that I roll on the d6 for this giant in combat, how it will translate to maybe how the rules in Karn work, some special homebrew stuff, home-ruled things that I've got going here, prepped for myself, for my characters in the scene. We'll get to that in just a moment. This also inspired me as I was thinking about my own style, and I've been really reflecting a lot lately. If you've seen my posts on Bluesky, again, you can find me, I Am the Party. Pretty easy to find on Bluesky, but if you see my posts on there, I do comment from time to time about the experiences like getting into solo RPGs and learning more about how it works for me, because I do believe it's a very individualistic hobby, and we beg, borrow, and steal from other people, other recordings, from advice that we hear, cobble together what works for you. Could just be playing straight out of a journaling RPG like 1,000-Year Vampire, 1,000-Year-Old Vampire as it might be, or it can be cobbling together rules like what I've got here today, or a combination somewhere in between. There's no wrong way to do it. But I had a realization recently. One of the great joys for me playing a solo RPG is taking the pressure off of myself to have answers for questions that I anticipate might come up in a session of play with my players. I am the player. I am the GM. And so I have a lot of grace, I guess I could give for myself, a lot of patience and open-mindedness about how much I expect myself to know when I'm coming into these role-playing sessions. I do only actively role-play and play my game under the guise of being recorded, or recording myself, I should say. Anytime that I've actually played in the moment and with the story progressing has come about as a recording. You've heard as much as I've actually played if you've listened to all my episodes. That being said, going back to episode 1, talking about how everything is play, thinking about my roles really in solo RPG, you end up taking on more than one hat. Do a lot of GM work behind the scenes when I play in a live recording. Probably doesn't make sense to say out loud, but when I'm playing in real time and recording myself, I try to be as prepared as possible so I don't have disruptions. I want to be able to be in the flow, again, experiencing true fun. In a past episode, I talked about that, but staying in the flow of the story and the adventure. I think that's also been a contributor to why sometimes my play sessions actually end up being a little shorter than what I anticipated. Part of that's intentional, but part of it is that I naturally kind of reach the end of a flow of play, and that's when I usually stop. And the play itself is only about 10 to 20 minutes, somewhere in there, depending on what the circumstances of the day calls for. Thinking back on what that means for me as a player, as a GM, as someone, as a solo RPG enthusiast now at this point. I've been doing it for about 2.5 months. It's safe to say I'm an enthusiast. It's interesting thinking back about all the advice I read before I just decided to jump in and get my feet wet. If you do research online about solo RPGs, you're going to find the concept of oracles or GM emulators, that those are often sought out and people get for advice on what's the best emulator for me, how can I run X, Y, or Z game with a GM emulator, those types of things. Like the Mythic game engine, the second edition, is probably the biggest, most popular, successful GM emulator. Well, I own that, and I own some other Oracle products, Oracles being the game engine, kind of the AI that can help guide the randomness of your game. I've really discovered for myself that I have more of a need for a player emulator than a GM emulator. I guess it's because I'm an always GM. I would much more prefer to run a game, to take the time in between game sessions with my group of players, to think about like, ooh, what could happen next, and what's some possibilities, where can I take the story? So I think of myself more as like the story architect, which is a natural role for a solo RPG player who does have more towards that GM end of the spectrum of GM and player, different hats that you're wearing. And anyways, I find myself definitely gravitating in a solo RPG experience. And so I don't know, it's been really interesting to see that at some points I've definitely utilized randomness to determine how the story will go, but actually it's more from the perspective of my player characters, my protagonists in the story, determining what they're going to do. So I find myself on the flip side of where I think a lot of solo RPG players end up trying to figure out like, ooh, how am I going to build this dungeon as I explore it? How am I going to be surprised as a player? And I feel like I'm more interested in learning about how my characters are going to interact, react, grow, change, get worse over time, get better over time, naturally evolve as characters in the story. To the roots here of using Cairn, and that's Cairn. I know I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but I think that that's been a really big boon for me. Utilize a light rule set as my player-facing oracle, or my player-facing oracle. I'll call it that. Some game systems are much more player-facing, where the GM doesn't do anything in secret. Players know exactly potential outcomes that could happen as a result of their actions, where the story can go. And I think that's also kind of where I see myself as a solo RPG player or solo GM. My characters are kind of the most random aspect of the whole thing, my player characters, rather than the story, the setting, how monsters are going to react. And of course, I'm saying this knowing that I'm going to be using a random reactions table for this giant troll giant thing my characters are facing today. That being said, I still made the determination. I didn't randomly figure it out. I didn't randomly roll to determine, oh, it's going to be a giant and it's going to be in the mountainside. I have an idea behind why that's the case, playing into the greater aspect of the story at large, of the campaign world. That might have been too much for preamble. I don't know. I'm feeling energetic about this, obviously, and I'm interested to continue to explore more of the behind the scenes of what goes into solo role-playing, and also continue the story. I have a really big world in mind. We're only in a very tiny portion of it. We're just going to keep on going. Keep on following the flow of this story and see where it takes us, and see what my characters do and how they surprise me, because that's really honestly what I'm at this point. Last time, when I was playing, we were exploring this alcove in a mountainside, 3 openings, and we had Talls and Mender. They're on their journey south. They're being led by a hireling tracker. He's a stout fellow named MORT CUTWELL, and he's here for the money. He's in it for the money, but he seems to be good company at least, and he's satisfied with the payment that Solgren, the elder druid back in Spire, paid him so that he would take them south to the village of the Brims in what's known as the Burial Lands, or the Lowlands, beneath the shadow of the mountain, the Daggerspine Mountains. We're in this alcove. The 3 of them were sitting around a campfire, Campfire's still going. I've introduced for myself a countdown timer for when the campfire is going to go out if it's unattended, and it's their only source of light really in this small alcove, this 3-sided inlet into the mountainside, the lower mountains, and it's been recently revealed, excavated, and so these openings are something that Mort had not seen before. Wasn't really too disturbed by it. Not a lot happens in this journey between Spire and the Burial Lands and the village of Brim. They set up camp here. They were just sitting around telling stories, chit-chatting, getting caught up on the day, starting to rest, and they heard this grinding noise come from the center of these 3 openings that surround them. Massive figure in this face with these horns, and one arm comes reaching out of this opening that's in the center of this alcove, and this sound of scraping stone just surrounds them and echoes and reverberates all around them. And finally, a creature who seems to be at least twice as tall as Mender, who's the tallest member of this party, stands up fully and pulls out an ancient-looking, like petrified tree trunk, essentially, behind it, and stands up fully, and they can see now that it's covered with dust. Its skin seems to be almost the same color as the dust itself that it's covered in. There's clouds of this dust, almost like a chalky cloud that comes off of it. All 3 of them were stunned initially by the appearance of this giant stone creature. Mender, of the 3 of them, was able to gain their senses and has drawn their longsword, which in Cairn it uses 2 hands. It's a 2-handed weapon, so they grab it, grip it in both hands, and kind of take up a defensive position around the fire and around Talz and Mort, putting themselves in between this giant and the other 2 members of their party. The fire will be rolling on a usage die, so basically if the campfire, it's a D6 at the end of every combat round. Actually, I'm going to change that. In the moment, I'm going to change it. Whenever the giant goes, I'm going to roll the d6. So it's kind of in the middle of the round. On a 1 or 2 result of the d6, it drops to a d4. And then in the future, when the giant goes, I'm going to roll a d4. On a 1 or a 2, the d4 is used up, and the fire will go out. So there's a ticking time bomb of light in this. I don't think you have to be a genius. You don't even have to be as smart as Mort Cutwell to get a sense that maybe a creature who lives in total darkness isn't too afraid of a fire going out, isn't going to be too bothered by that. So it's definitely a time crunch on the side of my player characters. Mender, take the first action here, and in Cairn, combat's pretty intuitive. We're going to have Mender slide forward a couple. I've got a little battle mat in front of me with some Dragonbane standees, which are just wonderful. I love the art, and I love having these little standees for myself. And we're going to move Mender into combat with the giant, knowing that Mender's drawn their 2-handed longsword, and we're going to have Mender take a sweep towards one of the knees of this giant creature. So the longsword has a d10 damage die. In Cairn, everyone hits automatically. There's no to hit roll. There's simply damage rolls, and then the damage roll itself is modified by the armor of the target. And this creature has a natural armor of 1. Skin is stone tough. Just in general, Cairn says that the highest armor NPC, a PC, a creature can have is 3. So 1's still pretty moderately tough. Ooh, I rolled a 2. So Mender, not maybe being super confident about this action, still takes a step forward, and years of combat training comes to their mind. They've been in battles. They've been in wars of Halinari expansionism and colonialism, as the western portion where the Halinar Empire of the subcontinent has been conquered over time. And Mender's not innocent of these battles and these wars of aggression. However, it's been a while. It's been a little bit since Mender's been in combat and has had to take violent action. And also, perhaps something in the time has changed Mender since they have been, had seen this great loss from their squad of fellow stewards and been in the Bridge of Midnight. All of that being said, I rolled a 2. I'm going to subtract 1 from the armor of this hill giant, and it just chips away at a bit of the kneecap. The giant's not too bothered by this. Clearly just kind of groggy and waking up still from whatever kind of deep slumber it had been. It had found itself in this cavern, in this tunnel. But I'm going to roll now to see what the giant does, because the giant gets to go next. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to roll the usage die on the campfire to see if the campfire is still roaring just as strong. It is. I rolled a 4. So the campfire's still there, still doing well. But we're going to roll now for the hill giants what their action is. I rolled a 1, which in the bestiary says crushing blow. The giant swings its fist or club and bashes a player character with all its might. Pretty straightforward. It's probably, like I said, groggy and upset, and it's just going to try to bring this petrified tree trunk that's in its hand and slowly sweep towards Mender on this. So we're going to roll a d8 for the hill giant attack, and the hill giant might get a little more powerful after a round or two of waking up, but we'll see. It's a d8, and Mender has 1 armor as a result of the equipment that they were provided back in Spire. I rolled a 1. All right, so clearly Mender is able to dodge out of the way, hit protection, serving them well. The light armor of the leather shoulder armor plating that they have on allows them some extra mobility. So the hill giant... And the it's like making children's sound effects now. The petrified tree trunk scrapes across the stony, rocky, gravelly ground of this alcove, but does not actually impact Mender at all. It just kind of goes on its way, and the momentum actually takes the hill giant over a step or two and kind of throws it off balance for a moment. That's the end of that actual round. The other 2 characters didn't get to act because they didn't meet their initiative roll. It's pretty straightforward again. I probably could say that for everything in Karen. Either you make your dex check at the beginning of combat or you don't. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm blanking. Can't remember exactly if I roll every round for dexterity, but I'm kind of interested in that to see. I'm going to roll it for all 4 of these, or all 3 of the player characters here, Talz, Mender, and Mort. Roll all 3 of them and see who gets to go before the hill giant recovers and moves, and who gets to move after the hill giant. So let's do that. So I'm going to roll for Mender first, and Mender has a 7 dexterity. I rolled a 5, so Mender gets to act at the top of the round. Talz has a 10 dexterity. Rolled a 15. Talz has to wait until after the giant goes. And Mort, being a hireling, has 10 across all 3 of his stats. He rolled a 14. So actually the same outcome as last time. I didn't even need to roll to determine who gets to act when, but it'll be Mender acting first, kind of already in the sequence of the battle, already in the lethal dance of combat with their longsword drawn. And then the giant will act, and then we'll follow up with Talz and Mort taking their first actions this round. Mender's going to continue to try to sweep in and maybe start to flank the right side of this giant, seeing that it's possible to damage it. The longsword doesn't seem to be any worse for wear after taking a nick out of the kneecap of this giant's left leg. Let's try now for the right leg. So let's make another roll with the longsword. That's considerably better. So I rolled a 5. Minus 1 will put us at 4 HP of damage. So that was a big hit, and that definitely caused the giant to have to kneel down as it assessed the damage that it took on its right leg. So it's kneeling, it's kind of on one foot, one good leg, and one damaged leg, and it's actually holding the tree trunk in its right arm. So it's just gonna, let's see what, actually, before I say this, I'm gonna roll for the fire. Let's see if the fire still continues. Fire's still good, and then I'm going to roll now for the giant's action. Let's see how it reacts to this big hit it took on its leg. 4. Ooh, a sweeping blow. The giant sweeps its club at all enemies within 6 meters. The attack, it inflicts bludgeoning damage and knocks the victims down. So there's only one enemy, and that is Mender. So it's only going to attack Mender. However, now that it's woken up, I'm going to be rolling a d10 instead of a d8 on the attack, and this will still knock Mender down to be basically prone, essentially. Okay, so I rolled a 3. So Mender takes 2 damage off of their HP, their hit protection. Here's another good time to mention how seemingly fragile characters are in Cairn. Mender starts with 6, and they're down now to 4 hit protection. Hit protection also heals up incredibly quickly. It is not hit points. Mender is knocked down and definitely gets the wind knocked out of them. This petrified tree trunk swings and actually just kind of like explodes on impact against Mender. Debris from this tree trunk goes everywhere. The weapon is gone, but Mender is definitely worse for the wear on this hit. Now we're going to actually utilize Talz for the first time in combat. Finally, Talz will be able to take action. Now, Talz does have some spells. Look them up again to refamiliarize myself. She received those from Solgren before leaving and she has anthropomorphize. I'm going to say probably not too helpful in this situation. When you cast anthropomorphize, an animal either gains human intelligence or human appearance for 1 day. So that's more of a utility spell. However, Talz also has displace. An object appears to be up to 15 feet from its actual position. And what I'm going to do now is have Talz cast displace, and there's no spell casting roll or anything like that, but whenever you cast a spell from the spell book, you gain a fatigue in your inventory. And there's only 10 inventory slots. Talz is actually using 7 of her 10 inventory slots. Casting displace, I'm going to have her cast that upon Mender. As I mentioned in a previous episode earlier on, Talz is actually oriented to the Bridge of Fire. And so she gathers up herself, her wits, now that she's seen Mender get hit, and there's like an explosion of wood splinters and everything, and it's chaos. The fire itself is casting these massive shadows on the walls of this alcove and the ceiling of the cliff that hangs over it. Clouds of this chalky dust are just forming and rolling off of the hill giant as well. Talz is now ready to take action and help out, and is going to cast Displace, pulling up from her inside somewhere and pulling it out of her, basically like making a motion to pull it out of her chest. She casts Displace over towards Mender's direction to hopefully disorient the giant and make it impossible for the giant to really target where Mender is. Mender is now appearing, if you think of it, on a grid 3 squares away from where they really are. The giant is none for the wiser that this has happened. The giant's clearly not a creature of high intelligence since it just started attacking them out of the blue. Talz casts this and gains a fatigue. So that is now their 8th of 10 potential spots on here. Is going to start to slide over, make some movements over to where Mender is pretending to be, I guess, is where she pretends Mender is, to maybe add some more illusion to this. Mort. So Mort being Mort, he is got not a lot of tricks up his sleeve. He just has a simple short bow, and he's going to roll it, and that's a d6 damage. He's going to try to shoot it right at the rock giants. Ooh, he rolled a 6. So -1 armor. Thinking Mort knows you always aim for the eyes. You always aim for a weak spot if you can. One of the arrows goes right into the eyes, a soft jelly-like eye of this stone giant, and really enrages it. It gets incredibly angry. Top of the round, and I'm going to have Mender not make a roll since they got knocked down. They're going to have to pass for this turn. But we'll see if Talz and Mort get to go before the giant does. So Talz, again, has a 10 dexterity. Rolled a 20. So I'm actually going to say Talz actually loses her action. She can still make a move or like a quick action, but that's rough. That is a critical failure on that dexterity check. Mort, let's see what Mort's up to. Mort rolled a 5, so Mort can still go. Mort will now take a step to get into some better range of the creature and attempt to make another shot with drawing another arrow swiftly from his quiver, pulls his sharp bow taut, and lets loose an arrow towards the creature. Rolled another 5. I'm not going to say he gets the other eye, but he definitely has found some spots. Maybe the head and the neck are a little bit less well armored and protected from the stony skin of the creature, and he's just raining down arrows upon this thing, just peppering it. It is upset. It's definitely starting to really feel some pain here. Potentially, you could even say is getting into its death throes. Let's have the fire. Let's roll for fire to see if that gets diminished at all. Nope, still strong. They must have loaded up the fire with a lot of fuel right before this creature came out. However, it is the creature's turn. Let's roll to see what the creature does. Ooh, I rolled a 6. Stone throw. The giant grabs a large rock and throws it at an enemy within 10 meters. The victim suffers bludgeoning damage and is, of course, knocked down. Gonna pick up a massive boulder, and now that he's unarmed, he's searching around. He's holding one injured eye with his one hand and just reaches for anything he can, hurls it towards Mort. Let's make a roll to see how much damage this does. That's a 10. That's sad to say. That might be the end of Mort. That's a huge hit. Mort's not wearing any armor. He's just he's a tracker. He's a wilderness survival guy. He travels lightly. So 10 damage is going to be more than most seasoned characters can take in one hit in Cairn. And Mort is seasoned, but the boulder is just about the same size as him and just smashes into him. And he gets pinned against this gravelly ground. The rock lands basically thudding on top of him, and he just screams in pain. Arr! That's what he does. Talz now is caught, trying to get over to Mender to check on them, and seeing that Mort is just probably way worse for wear than he's ever been in his life, long as his life might last. So Talz is kind of stuck. Talz will, again, rolled really poorly on her initiative roll, so I think Talz will just continue to move over to Mender. She has to have her priorities, and her loyalties, of course, lie with her longtime companion and leader, sergeant of her squad. So she's over there, and she is able to help Mender to their feet. I'll say that much at least. That's the end of that round. Let's roll again now. Mort's definitely pinned down. He's not going to be doing much. Roll for Mender first to see if they pass their dexterity check. That's a miss. I rolled an 8 and I needed a 7 or less. Talz, let's see how she does. 13 and a 10. So the giant is going to act first. This is going to be rough. This is not going to be a good time for anybody involved. Let's roll for the fire to see if that starts to go out. Nope, still going strong. It's blazing. It's almost more terrifying that they can see that the fire is still blazing as strongly as it has been. The giant now is going to see Talz standing next to a blurred kind of outline of Mender. The problem being that Mender and illusionary Mender are in a line straight. So it's very likely that the giant, if it runs towards this illusion of Mender and where Talz is standing further away, could just barrel right through Mender. But we'll see. Let's see what happens. I'm going to roll for the giant's action. All right, I rolled a 1. It's a crushing blow. The giant swings its fist or club, bashes a player character with all its might, and then knocks it down. So it is going to, I'm going to roll, just do a 50-50 roll essentially to see if it runs into the actual character, the actual physical representation that Mender is, or if it just kind of swings right by and doesn't catch it. I rolled a 1, so it's going to actually collide with Mender and realize that, wait a minute, and look very confused and and it'll be like, kind of asking a question of the space, but it doesn't really care. It's just going to bring its fist down on actual Mender. See, it's not going to be very pretty. Let's see what happens. I'm going to roll a d10. I rolled a 7, so -1 for Mender's armor is a 6. That puts Mender at -2. It's a big hit, and it does knock Mender down. That being said, something incredibly alarming happens as the giant's fist collides with Mender, basically straight in their face. Just a punch from a bison colliding with you. Talz first screams in shock and terror as she sees her longtime companion and compatriot get hit. Mender falls to the ground after getting kind of thrown a little bit from the power of the force of the punch. I'm going to roll a d6 here. I rolled a 5. A shadow, even in the bright blaze of this campfire that they've got going, a shadow falls upon Mender, and Talz, tears coming to her eyes. She can't really make out the details of Mender other than that, almost as if the light of this world is going out. For her only real connection still left alive on this side of the entire continent. She thinks Mender is passing, but a shadow covers Mender, and Mender stands up and takes an action, and Mender will rush the giant now, broadsword in 2 hands, ready just to kind of stab, a charging, stabbing motion, almost as if the broadsword itself was like a large boar spear. Talz can't believe that she's even seeing this with her own eyes, that somehow Mender is able to stand up and charge the creature. Even what seemingly should have been, what just happened to Mort, should have been Mender's fate as well. Mender's going to make a roll. I rolled an 8, so -1 from the armor. Mender leaps into the air, just covered in darkness and shadow. Still some details, but the tabard that they're wearing, that light blue tabard with the sun and the 9 pointed triangles sewn in white, seems to be covered in darkness. The colors of itself, of the design itself, fade to obscurity. Mender's able to jump up and smash the tip of their sword basically through a vital part, the throat of the giant. The giant falls and Mender lands on top of it, sword still sticking out of the giant's neck, essentially. Talz rushes over, gasps as she sees that a black miasma is starting to come over and take over Mender's body, and she pulls Mender off of the giant, pulls the sword out of the giant's throat and puts it back in Mender's scabbard, and starts to lift up Mender, who's silent and is not making any noise, but evidently is still breathing, and the two of them run. They do all that they can. Talz has no idea what to do to help. She knows that they can't stay here, and they run off into the woods. As they're running, thunder crack breaks out, and rain begins to fall. And we will leave it there. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk again soon.